A lilac comes on a poison thorn, in a dress dirty and torn, young and playing as the black crow flies. Mama's weeping, hear the mountains cry. There was another, a wild dirt flower. Cold was her heart, and its dark eyes dire. Tears on the ground, where love did die. 'Neath the bloody moon, hear the mountains cry.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
We're back.
Yay. We've missed y'all.
We have. That 2-week break was nice, but I feel like it's been a long time since we've sat here behind the mics.
So if we're rusty tonight, you'll have to be patient with us.
Yeah, give us a little grace. We have some shout outs. The first one is Christian Moore has bought us 5 coffees.
Thank you so much, Christian.
We've also gotten some really nice comments from
Wow.
Christian, I believe on YouTube, and I would have to look at the other. But yes, definitely getting a lot of support from Christian Moore. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Christian. And also, we want to shout out favorite sister. I believe that's Melody's sister.
Well, let's see. Darlene has one sister, so
I do.
technically she would be your favorite.
True.
But I have a sister who would say something just like that. And I'm pretty sure I know who that was. So thank you, favorite sister,
Yes.
for our 5 coffees that you also bought.
Thank you so much.
And if it's who I think it is, also very supportive, shares our podcast with a lot of people and talks us up. And so
we appreciate her
Yes.
very much.
And then someone who wants to remain nameless also bought 5 coffees, but we're pretty sure we know who that one is too.
We think so, but thank you so much. Okay, so we wanted to share our favorite episodes from this past year. Melody, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. So I chose one of mine and one of yours.
Okay.
So my favorite one of my own was The Exorcist, the real story of The Exorcist.
That was a good one.
I really liked that story and researching it because I learned something I didn't know before. I found it very fascinating.
Yeah.
When it got to yours, I could not decide between 2.
Okay.
The one you did about Peggy Carr,
Okay, yes.
that story had the craziest twist at the end, and the way that you told it, I just couldn't foresee what was coming.
Right.
That was a crazy
That was
story.
a crazy story.
And so I think that one, was my favorite. Just as equally my favorite was the martyrdom of John and Betty Stam,
yeah, I forgot
because
about that one.
I mean, that was just a beautiful story of forgiveness and redemption. And that one really was impactful to me.
That was a good story. I'm not bragging on myself, but the story itself was good.
Yes, it was definitely.
My favorite of yours, I really loved the mysterious death of Smith Reynolds.
Oh, yeah. I do
That
love that one.
historical, that was a great one. That was episode 45 if you want to go back and listen to that. Another one of yours that I really liked is the Morgan murders.
The Morgan murders.
In Cummings, Georgia.
Yes.
You did a really good job with that story, and that was episode 83.
Okay, thank you. I didn't put the episode numbers on yours. Oops.
Oh, no, that's okay. The one of mine that I love telling the best, I really liked researching it, was Horror on Smutty Nose.
Yes, that was a really good one. That was the ones that were the immigrants from Sweden?
Sweden, yes.
Yes, that was a great story to tell. Yeah, that was a good one.
So we had a pretty good year.
We did. Listeners, if you would like to chime in and tell us what your favorite was that you listened to this year, just, hop over into the Facebook group and do that.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll
please.
just put a little question on there this week about that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, if you or somebody that you know has any experience in marketing or is maybe in school for marketing and you need some experience, we would love to maybe do some bartering with you because we're actually looking for somebody to help us with marketing the podcast.
We just need some help with that because that's not in our wheelhouse.
Right.
So we just thought we would put it out there and see if any of you may have a college student
Right.
who's studying marketing, or maybe you are a college student listening.
Yes.
You could email us if you have any suggestions or if you want to touch base with us at hardtimesandtruecrimes@gmail.com. Again, hardtimesandtruecrimes@gmail.com.
Great. Okay, so are you familiar with Haywood County in North Carolina?
I have heard of it, but I don't know anything about it really.
You probably know more than you think you do because
Oh.
it is nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Oh.
Yes, so it's home to Waynesville.
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
Yep, to Canton, to Clyde, to Lake Junaluska, and Maggie Valley.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I personally believe it's one of the most beautiful counties in North Carolina.
When I was a kid, they had Ghost Town in the Sky up there in Maggie
Yes.
Valley.
Yep.
And I remember going there as a child, but which is still there, but it's not open anymore. But
My brother tried to get us to break in up there, but anyway.
Oh, okay. That's a whole other story. That's a whole other true crime show.
That is so cool. So you got to go to that?
Yes. Now, when I was little, I think you couldn't get up there without, you had to ride the chairlift up the mountain
Yes.
to get in, if I remember correctly.
It's the same with the Oz.
So how was he going to get in? How was he going to trespass in Maggie Valley?
He's never been there, so he didn't know.
Oh, so that put that kibosh to your plan.
It probably would have never happened. So yeah, up there, you know that there's mountains and valleys and breathtaking scenery, just beautiful. Have you ever seen the movie Cold Mountain?
Yes. Great movie.
Yes, absolutely. So if any of you guys have not seen that movie, it's set in Cold Mountain, which is in Haywood County.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and of course, the name of the movie is also Cold Mountain. And it's just this terribly sad, beautiful, like haunting Southern Gothic film,
Yes.
would you say? Yeah. It's set back in Civil War times, definitely not kid friendly. But like as soon as I watched it back in 2003, I ran out and bought the soundtrack.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see that you would do that. Yeah.
And still to this day, it's probably my favorite movie soundtrack. But anyway, I wish we could play it here on the podcast because I feel like it would be so fitting.
Yes.
But the real Cold Mountain is in Haywood County, and it stands about 6,030 feet above sea level. If you've watched the movie, then you'll know it's this region with like these deep, dark forests. And if you look at pictures, it's also full of like wildflowers in the spring and, fern thickets. It's beautiful. But enough about Cold Mountain. Let's get back to the other parts of Haywood County. So another interesting fact about Haywood is that the last shot of the Civil War was fired there in Waynesville on May 9th in 1865, which was 30 days after General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox in Virginia. But because Haywood County is so isolated, the people didn't know that the war was over.
Right. Yeah. I'm a big Civil War buff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I thought that was really cool.
But I did not know that was the last shot fired there. I don't know. I maybe have just missed that.
Well, this side of the Mississippi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I did know that, they just didn't know the fighting was over yet.
Yes.
And they just kept fighting until.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty interesting.
That is.
But now I want to tell you about a person named Nancy Ann Conrad, who was born in 1848 in a part of Haywood County known as Little Cataloochee Township. This remote little section is today part of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It's about 20 miles from the closest town, and it's only accessible by a single winding, narrow gravel road. It's just a few hours away from us, so we need to go and take a day trip there one day. The Cherokee used to go and hunt and fish there, but Nancy's family were among the first known permanent settlers. And they actually settled sometime in the early 1840s, around the time she was born. They cleared the land, plowed fields, built, little cabins, and raised their families there. At least one of Nancy's brothers and his family lived there until the 1930s, when the government came in and forced them to sell because the state park was coming in. But some of the family structures are still there to this day.
Oh, man.
Her father's meat house, and I believe the cabin that she grew up in is still there. saw pictures of it, but I know for sure that the meat house. So it's this magical place in the middle of the mountains that time hasn't touched. Even like there's the church there, the old cemetery, and lots of old home places. So it's not just theirs.
And do you think it's possible that Hurricane Helene may have touched
I
it?
hope not.
Yeah.
I
don't
really
know
hope
how
not.
far it went that way, but
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Cause it's, I mean,
right there.
yeah. But I do love that the state park preserved that history. So I'm going to post some of those pictures in our Facebook group.
Yes, please do.
But anyway, life in Cataloochee was like life in any other mountain community. Women raised the kids, tended to the sick, had babies. They kept big fires going to cook and heat in the winter, also to keep wild animals away.
Like coyotes?
Exactly. Yes. There was no running water in the cabins, so they and the children toted pails full of water from nearby springs. They did the wash at the spring and hung the clothes on bushes to dry. Once a week, or even less often, the families took turns bathing by the fireplace in a wooden tub filled with that spring water, if they believed in that sort of thing, because some men bragged that they never had a bath a day in their life. A swim in a river or creek was plenty for some.
Ugh.
I know. Can you imagine how they smelled?
No, it just, ugh.
Because those men, they worked like we've never seen men work. I mean, I feel like my husband worked really hard, but nothing in comparison.
They had to work the sweat of their brow every single day, I'm sure. But, ugh.
So sweaty and dirty.
Yuck.
Ooh. Anyway, of course, men and boys, they worked, the farm, tending to the livestock, hunting, planting, and harvesting. And that may sound simple. I may be making it sound simple, but it is not at all. It was backbreaking and heartbreaking as well back then because there were just hard times. There were epidemics, whooping cough, and measles, and things that would just take out entire families. Wild animals, bears, and panthers would stalk them. A lady named Hattie Caldwell Davis wrote in the 1930s of an incident that happened to her grandmother. Her grandmother and Allie Bennett were both at home one night while the men were out, and they were alone cooking while panthers roamed the valley. The panthers smelled the fresh pork cooking, and they were hungry. They jumped on top of the log cabins, scratching and tearing at the shingles. They were scratching and tearing at the chimney, trying to tear away enough rocks to get down in the house. Each stayed in their own house and kept a big fire roaring in the fireplace to keep the panthers out.
That's terrifying.
So yeah, that's how Nancy grew up. That was her life.
There are naysayers who say that we don't have panthers in North Carolina, and I do not believe that for a second. And because of stories like these from long ago, I believe up there in those mountains and those way up there, I believe there are absolutely panthers. And that is so scary.
Isn't it? Okay, so let me just say this is an old story. There's no way that I can tell this 100% accurately. I got my information from books, newspaper articles, from findagrave.com, burial records, and those sorts of things. And let me tell you that they all vary in their accounts. And so it wasn't an easy thing putting this story together, but I think I did the best that I could possibly do.
Sure. And I mean, that's, again, the same way it was with trying to write that Frankie Silver story. The same exact. There's just no way to get every detail absolutely factually correct.
Right. And so I just want to start out by saying that I'm probably going to get some facts wrong. So Nancy grew up a lot like this, and legend has it that one day when she was about 10 years old, her mom and dad were busy doing chores, and her mama had asked Nancy to keep an eye on her little brother. So they're playing outside the cabin, and Nancy got distracted as she, walked away from him just for a minute. And all of a sudden, she heard this ear-splitting scream. It was her mother. And then she heard her brother, crying. And Nancy turned back, and she saw her little brother, John, being dragged away by a bear.
Oh, that's horrible.
By that time, her father, Jim, realized what was going on and had grabbed his gun and started running after his son and the bear. And he finally did manage to catch up with them, and he shot the bear, and he was able to get John, but he was in bad shape.
And how old was the little boy again?
He was 5.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Nancy's mama was crying, of course, and Nancy knew from the way that her brother looked and her parents' reactions that he was probably going to die. She hadn't had time to really think about how or why it had happened. It just happened so quick. And there was no time to wait for a doctor to come to them. And so Jim, Nancy's dad, made tourniquets to stop the bleeding, and he loaded him up to take him to the doctor. He would not let his wife go because he just didn't think she could handle it if the worst were to happen. And it was very possible that the worst would happen. After he loaded John up and took him away, Nancy went to her mother, just wanting to comfort her. But her mother looked at her with pure hate in her eyes, and she told her, "This is your fault. Your brother's going to die, and it's because of you." Nancy was like shocked at first. Like, her mom had always kind of favored her little brother, but this was cruel, and she wasn't used to that kind of treatment. But then it all just kind of washed over her, the events of the morning, and she was supposed to be watching her brother, and she'd been told about daydreaming and not paying attention, but she turned away, and now her brother was going to die. So she just absorbed that guilt.
What a horrible,
and shame. Yeah.
Horrible thing to put on a kid like that.
Terrible.
Oh.
Yeah. And she didn't defend herself, and she felt like she shouldn't. She believed that it was fully her fault, which is so sad. Sometimes there's nobody to blame.
Yeah. Fact is, accidents happen.
They just happen.
I mean, who would have foreseen a bear coming and dragging that kid off?
But incredibly, John did not die.
Wow.
He had problems caused by the mauling for the rest of his life, but he lived. Still, her mother never treated her the same after that day. And Nancy never really forgave herself. She just kind of turned like inward, you know. She became quiet. Her life was just hard and sad from that moment on. But her brother, John, always loved her. And he never had any ill feelings toward her, never believed it was her fault. And I think her dad was probably, like a lot of dads back then, you know, they weren't super affectionate, but I do think he loved her.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up having 5 more children, so 7 altogether. One day when she was about 11 or 12, Nancy discovered this little cave in the side of a mountain over by Utah Mountain. And she would go there, and it was kind of like a refuge to her. She would just go in and either play just to be alone. You know, as a teenager, she probably daydreamed, but she just really enjoyed this place. It was, you know, a quiet place to go when she wanted to be alone. And again, they're in this little cabin. I saw pictures of the cabin, and it was a little cabin. I cannot imagine 9 people.
Oh, gosh.
So she lived through the Civil War. And those were some hard times.
For sure.
She would later say the raiders who came through the mountain in the backwoods, you know, robbing and burning barns and homes, she said she felt like they weren't regular troops. They were just cruel. She lived through a lot. I've also heard accounts that she was sexually assaulted by
some of the Union troops.
Some of the Union troops, yeah.
You know, there's a lot of movies that portray that on both sides.
Yeah.
Humanity's sometimes depraved.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Right. A few years after the Civil War ended, in 1871, at 23, she married a man named Richard Kerley. So she became Nancy Kerley. He seemed to really love her, but it was more of a marriage of convenience for her. She did not really love him. He was a little bit slow. And although he was really good to her, I mean, good as gold, she just didn't love him.
So when you say convenience, was it just that she needed a
needed a
spouse?
place to stay. Her brother ended up staying in the cabin that her parents had owned, and they ended up moving. She was displaced and she really had nowhere to go. Okay. And so got married.
Did what she needed to do.
Mm-hmm. This was her way out. And it went okay because there wasn't much time in the day to sit around and wish for another life. That's an indulgent. Mountain people, especially in that era, did not have time for. So she did her, wifely duties, and Nancy got pregnant with a baby boy that she and Richard would name William Henry. Things went okay for almost 20 years until a man named Dude Hannah started coming around the house, helping out with chores. Poor Robert would end up catching Nancy and Dude sleeping together.
Oh, no.
So he told her that she had to get her stuff and she had to leave. She ended up leaving her husband and her little boy. So he divorced her. To make matters worse, Nancy is 40 and pregnant now.
Oh, does she know?
And not married.
And does she know who the baby's dad is?
Yes, she believes that it's Dude Hannah's baby. Yeah, you can guess how the people around there thought about her. There was a lot of judgment going on about things like that. Dude did let Nancy move in with him because she literally had nowhere to go and no way to survive in the mountains with a baby, but he had no intention of marrying her. After a few months, Nancy gave birth to a daughter that she named Sarah Miranda Elizabeth Jane. She called her Lizzie.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is. So no matter how hard life was, Nancy, though, was thankful for that little girl. She adored her. She really loved this little girl, Lizzie, like she'd never loved anybody else. But life with Dude Hannah sure was rough because he was an alcoholic who would, drink all the time, and he became abusive to her and her daughter. He wouldn't work half the time, but he worked Nancy like a dog. There's hardly anything to eat, that they'd all about starved to death. It was just a bad time. One night in a drunken rage, Dude burnt their cabin to the ground.
Okay. That wasn't very smart.
No.
So
Nancy and Lizzie were literally homeless.
Wow.
They had nowhere to go. Can you imagine how devastating that is? You freeze to death, you starve to death. So they wandered around a little while, kind of from house to house, almost like begging. And finally, a family, the Putnams, who lived in the Jonathan Creek section of the mountains, took the mother and daughter in, kind of begrudgingly. I mean, they didn't want to see him freeze or starve to death, but they themselves were getting old and didn't know how they were going to take on 2 more mouths to feed. Those were hard times for everybody.
Yeah.
But I believe that Nancy was related to the mother of the family somehow, because when I was going back over records, the Find a Grave stuff, the burial records, both of their maiden names were Conrad. Most people in that region were related. And so that makes this next part a little bit odd because by this time, Lizzie was up in age, like an older teen, and she wound up getting pregnant by the son of the family who'd taken them in. His name was Will Putnam and was most likely kin to Lizzie somehow. Hopefully it was a distant cousin. I'm not really sure. When Lizzie would give birth to her daughter, she named her Roberta Ann Putnam. But Will said that he did not believe she was his.
Do these women just have a bad reputation, or is it just because they were being like, I don't know.
I think they did have a bad reputation, yes, but I'm not sure if it was because of the circumstances.
Was it circumstances, or were they really just making some really bad, poor decisions here and continuing in that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm not sure. But Will said that he did not believe that the baby was his, and he never even tried to love or to be good to this little baby. And what in the world had she done wrong?
Yeah, or did just men up in the mountains treat women like that? And, there's always that possibility.
Exactly. So Will ended up moving into his own shack on his parents' property because they couldn't support all of them anymore. Now, there's babies being born. Will's messing around with Lizzie, and then there's Nancy, who's just kind of a burden to everybody, which is sad, but that's pretty much the way it was. Now, the truth is that Nancy did just about all the work over there because Will was too lazy and his parents were too old. They couldn't do the work. Food was always an issue. Mr. Putnam went to his son and he said, I'm not having y'all shacking up. You get married or you turn her loose. So by this time, Lizzie is pregnant with her second child.
Oh, no. And how old is she?
She's about 18 at this time. So Will told Lizzie what his pa had said, but he told her the only way that he would marry her is if she sent her 2.5-year-old daughter, Roberta, to the county poorhouse.
Wow. Now, I'm sorry, but, he got her pregnant that first time and said he didn't think it was his, but now she's pregnant again, and he's
saying, I'll raise this. The other ones, I believe, is mine. The first one, I don't think is mine.
And he just wants her to send her away? I don't think very highly of him either.
No. And with a new baby coming, he said, he's like, I don't believe she's mine and there's no room for her. He said there wasn't room for Nancy either, but if Roberta left, he'd let Nancy stay. After all, she was chopping all the firewood, cooking supper when there was something to cook, and I guess keeping everybody up around there. So he's like, I guess she can stay.
Yeah, he didn't want to turn her loose.
Right.
She was doing his job.
Now, I will say at first, Lizzie said, there's no way, I'm getting rid of my daughter. She just couldn't do it. But Nancy went to her and told her, just let me find Roberta a temporary home. Nancy is now in her 60s. It sounds so terrible to us, but the truth is we could always probably find somewhere to go. She's probably thinking there's literally nowhere for us to go. Like, we'll all die.
And very well could watch this little girl starve to death.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, but still.
Oh, it's so sad. Otherwise, she said, we're all going to be homeless and starve and freeze to death. And that thought terrified Nancy. She did love her daughter very, very much. And she was like, okay, this is a chance for her. Like, she can start all over, and she would have a place to stay. I mean, she convinced her that this is the right thing to do. So on a bitter cold February morning in 1913, Nancy bundled Roberta up in 8 layers of dresses so that she wouldn't freeze to death on their journey across Utah Mountain in the direction of the county home. Nancy carried Roberta a little ways, but this old woman weighed about 90 pounds. I've got pictures of her.
Okay.
So I'll show you. Yeah. And then Nancy came home that afternoon, and they were surprised because they really thought this was probably going to take a couple of days. I mean, it's only 15 miles, but this is mountainous. And so they were just really surprised. So Lizzie's asking, how in the world did you make it back so quick? And Nancy said that a man in a buggy had offered to take them to the county home. A couple weeks later, there was a baptism that the whole town turned out for. So Lizzie had a friend from Maggie Valley who'd showed up, and she asked her if she could take a blanket that she'd knitted to Roberta at the county home. And she was shocked when her friend told her there was no way her daughter was at the county home because they didn't take children there. And so she went to her mom and she's like, where's Roberta? And Nancy told her that she just didn't want to freak her out. She didn't want to scare her. She wanted her to, be okay with it. But that man who had given them a ride had offered to take Roberta to his house for him and his wife to raise. Now, by this time, neighbors are kind of catching wind of all this, and they're suspicious. And so they arrested Nancy, they arrested her daughter, and they arrested Will Putnam.
I mean, they have a missing little girl now.
Yeah.
Oh.
Under suspicion of murder. So the whole town, they formed this huge search party. They're looking everywhere. They're turning, the mountains upside down, and they didn't find anything. And Nancy, she's kind of changing her story. She's given varying different accounts of what had happened. But then one day, this teenage boy, this is April 3rd of 1913, and this teenage boy saw these buzzards. They were flying around atop of this cave on Adtate Mountain, which is where Nancy used to go when she was a little girl.
Oh.
And it's over, across over by Utah Mountain. Something's in there. But there's these big stones that are like set in front of the cave so that you can't get in. Finally, he's able to get in, and the smell is just overwhelming.
Oh.
There's a dead body there for sure. So little 2.5-year-old Roberta is laying face down, still dressed in her 8 dresses. Her fingers are bloody. She had been clawing and scratching, trying to get out of this cave.
Oh, gosh.
Yes.
No, she had been left in there alive?
She had been left in there alive.
Oh.
Stones had been placed all around the mouth of the cave to keep the baby from getting out. And she had starved to death.
Oh, that is the most horrible thing. And her grandmother's the one that left her in there.
Men storm this jail. They are ready to lynch Nancy. But they're stopped, by the authorities. The Beaufort Gazette from Thursday, March 5th in 1914 read, Nancy Kerley, aged 62, of Waynesville, North Carolina, confessed Saturday that she placed her grandchild, Roberta Putnam, in a mountain cave and walled her in, leaving her prey to cold and starvation.
How could she?
So her case had to be turned over to Swain County because she was not going to get a fair trial. There's nobody who's not going to convict her.
If she's confessed to it, I'd be ready to lynch her as well.
Yeah.
I'm just dumbfounded over here.
And they were too. She pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years of hard labor. At her age, the judge said it's assumed, this is a life sentence.
Mm-hmm.
She came to be called Aunt Nancy in the prison in Raleigh. This is something that I find interesting, I will say, in past times that you don't necessarily... We hold grudges today.
Yeah.
Like when somebody does something, we remember it and we don't trust them anymore. It's not the same way back then. I've noticed time and time again, I'm even thinking about the case that we did last Christmas. So while she's in prison, these newspaper articles, people are so friendly toward her.
Really?
It's bizarre to me. Yeah. So she came to be called Aunt Nancy in the prison in Raleigh. That's where she was sent. For 15 years, she worked in the sewing room, making quilts for other prisoners. After she became too feeble to do that, they sent her to the hospital where she was given a job of scrubbing floors and keeping the place swept up, which that seems harder to me than sewing, but okay. And in all the years that she was there, which altogether she was there for 16 years, she never once talked about her granddaughter. The only thing that she said was that she was innocent. She said she did not do it. She did plead guilty. She said she felt like she had to. She always maintained her innocence, always said she did not do it. She only said that she did not murder her and that she wanted to go back to her home in the mountains. That's it. In 1929, she was the oldest inmate in the state prison. When she was 83 years old, after serving 16 years, she was released to go back to her home in Haywood County, where she spent the rest of her life with the brother that was drug off by the bear.
Her brother? Oh, wow.
He took her into his home. Well, okay, she spent almost the rest of her life there until he died. In an interview, she said, I haven't got a thing against a soul in the world. Not a soul in this world. I'm an innocent woman. I've paid to the state of North Carolina all that it's asked of me for something that I didn't do. But God's been good enough to spare me to come home to my mountains. I'll soon be there now. In 1952, at 104 years old,
Whoa.
Nancy died in Swain County, the oldest citizen. She died in the home of her son. Her obituary said that she'd been declining in health for some time. Miss Kerley, who was born July 20th in 1848 of Haywood County, remembered well the Civil War. And that's where she gave that. It talked about how she often spoke about the war and the raiders who came through the mountain country and the backwoods, robbing and burning homes. And it just kind of gave an account of her life, all except for the murder I went back and read that she would chop wood almost up until she died. She would chop wood. A lot of people would like come in to the mountains at that time, like to just see like what was going on. And she would sell firewood bundles to them. Mm-hmm. They ended up calling her Old Nance Dude. Well, because she ran off with the guy, Dude Hannah.
Oh, yeah.
So her like nickname, in fact, the book that I read was Nance Dude. Yeah, she was known as the witch. Parents would be like, Nance Dude's going to get you if you go up there, you know.
Yeah.
And she did look scary. I'll show you her picture. Okay, this is what she looked like when she went to jail.
Oh, wow. Yes, she does look scary.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's when she went. So
yeah,
you can imagine what she looked like. That was in 1913. She lived until 1952.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she, like I said, she chopped wood. She always worked. She was a hard worker. I think that's what kept her alive.
She had to be. Yeah,
yes.
It was a tougher breed back then for sure.
And she would make money, you know, that way, like selling the bundles of firewood. And she always had a pack of black labs with her.
I'm guessing because of the bear thing that had happened, probably.
Mm-hmm. Probably.
Yeah.
So some people think, yes, she definitely did it. When you're desperate, you do desperate things. So I do know that like in concentration camps, they say that those people don't talk about it because some of them did terrible things while they were in there that they're not proud of because they were drove to desperation. But the thing that like I guess trips me up is that she dressed her in 8 layers of clothes. For what? If she had planned on doing that, what would be the need of taking such good care of her? There are a couple of different theories. One theory is when she left the house, she thought she was taking her to the county home. They wouldn't take her. And then she had tried some other places and there was literally nowhere for her to go. And she walled her in not to kill her, but to maybe protect her from a bear and was planning on going back. And when she went back, she was dead. There's that theory. The other theory is that she didn't do it. She was 90 pounds. These rocks or these stones were huge that were placed in front of the mouth of that cave. And they were saying, how could Nancy have done that? A lot of people believe that the stepdad did it and that Nancy may be protecting her daughter in that she knew that her husband did it, but she knew that her daughter wouldn't have a way to survive without her husband. So she'd have been kicked out of there and they'd have been right back at square one. So maybe even knowing that the husband did it, she was like, I'll take the fall.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm thinking through all those alternative ideas. She didn't ever cast blame on anybody else. No. She just said she didn't do it, right?
Yeah. She gave a lot of varying accounts.
I hate to think that she would put her in there and let her and trap her in there and let her die. Like that just, what? I mean, it sounds really horrible, but that would be way worse than if you just picked up a rock and bludgeoned her. So behind,
yeah, it would have been.
Because at least that would have been fast. Whereas this was a long drawn out death. And probably imagine, this breaks my heart, a 2.5-year-old stuck in there, probably scared to death.
For days
and starving and dark and can't get out. And your grandmother left you there. I mean, like that's just the worst of the worst of the worst. Mm-hmm. So I can't imagine what her motive would be for that.
Right.
I'm trying to think, like, I don't know. It just seems like there would have been some other options. I'm really speechless, to be honest.
Yeah. Now, I did read that Nancy took Roberta for a long time and left and went and stayed with her brother for a while. Kind of went from place to place with the little girl until she had no choice but to come back. And then he made him leave again. And then that's when that happened. So it's possible that she tried to,
I don't know if I believe that story because they said they were asking her why she got back so fast.
No, I'm saying before that whole incident happened.
Oh, before she took her.
Yeah, before she
poorhouse.
Took her then. She left and went.
She tried to before.
Yeah. And she actually went and stayed gone, they said, for months and then came back.
Okay.
In fact, there are newspaper articles and stories that say that. So I don't necessarily think she didn't try at all, But I do think that she did it.
Did that daughter stay with that Will guy?
She did.
Oh, that's horrible. Because,
Married him.
I can't imagine staying with him knowing that he tried to get me to get rid of my daughter. And that's what happened.
So she stayed with Will Putnam. They had Roberta, who was from 1910 to 1913. So she was just a baby.
Poor little Roberta.
Little
and why does he not think that's his baby? Or he does. He knows it's his baby. He's just taking advantage of her. I already just feel that about him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that. And then she ended up marrying him and had how many more kids?
She had 3 more kids. Yeah. So the little girl, remember that she was pregnant with?
Yeah.
So actually, that's why she got out of jail, was because she was getting ready to have little Bertha. And she had her in 1913, and she lived to 1999. And then they had little Fred, and then they had a William.
But they couldn't afford Roberta.
Right.
I mean.
Right.
This is one of those, I'm going to go home and think about this all night.
So what do you think? Because some people think she just did it out of self-preservation. It was kind of like either her or the little girl, and she needed a place to stay. And so she just took the girl and did what she had to do.
But why wouldn't you at least put her out of her misery? Why would you let her die such a horrible, horrible, horrible death?
Right.
So and then if she said later on, I did not kill her, she might have been thinking to herself, I didn't kill her.
Yeah.
I just left her to the elements where she had no choice but to die, but I didn't actually kill her. Maybe that was for her conscience. I don't know.
She did say, I loved her. Like, I didn't kill her. I loved her. Like I read,
Yeah. There's no way you would do everything to protect that baby, even if it meant you dying. Mm-hmm. Who would not do that?
Right.
So I just don't believe that she loved her.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying she didn't feel love towards her, but she did not have a true self-sacrificing love at all. And maybe that's the way she grew up. Maybe when you grow up in those kind of hard conditions and it's, survive everything, your whole life's all about just surviving. Yeah. Maybe it makes you a different person.
Yeah.
But I can't wrap my mind around somebody saying you loved her, but yet you did this.
Right. Now, I will say after she got out of prison, her kids, they loved her, even the son that she had abandoned, and they were pretty good to her.
And I'm thinking, if I was that hard up for survival and he's threatening to put my baby out, why not just the mom and her kill him?
Right.
And then, I don't know, just get rid of him.
But they lived on his parents' property. I don't know.
Yeah, but if he dies, maybe they still let him live there. Because, I got his 2 babies here.
Yeah. Right,
I don't know. That sounds horrible. So, again.
No,
I still think it's a better solution than what they did to that little girl. Whoever did it. That's just a whole lot of dysfunction. I don't know.
Well, let me tell you, there was a postcard.
What?
Of this little baby. You can hardly tell what it is. Of her.
Like a real picture.
A real picture of her. Outside the cave, dead. But you can hardly tell what it is. But that was circulating around there. Yes.
Wow.
So it's just she's legendary now because it's
and up in the hills.
She's like the real boogeyman.
Yeah, those ghost stories up in the hills, I'm sure. Yeah. Wow. Well, never has this been more true than it is right now, but those were some hard times.
A lilac comes on a poison thorn, in a dress dirty and torn, young hands playing as the black crow flies. Mama's weeping, hear the mountains cry. There was another, a wild dirt flower. Cold was her heart, and its dark eyes dire. Tears on the ground, where love did die. 'Neath the bloody moon, hear the mountains cry. Oh, dig his grave, narrow and deep. Set a jug of whiskey past thirsty feet, and lay 2 pennies on his roving eyes. 2 women wailing as the mountains cry. Oh, the wind blows weary and the willows sigh. Rivers of sorrow when the mountains cry.